Hello and welcome to the Friday, January 9th, 2026 edition of the SANS Internet Storm Center's Stormcast. My name is Johannes Ulrich and today I'm recording from Jacksonville, Florida. And this episode is brought to you by the SANS.edu undergraduate certificate program in applied cybersecurity. Well, one of the challenges that we are always faced with when we're looking at all of our honeypot data is that, well, how do we summarize it? How do we find patterns in the data? And of course, there are some great tools to do this. Today, we do have a blog post by Guy, who is talking a little bit about how he's using these tools in order to analyze honeypot logs. The tool that Guy is using here is Gephi or Gephi. I think that's sort of probably how it's being pronounced. This tool allows you to essentially visualize relationships. And what Guy did here was look, for example, at certain IP addresses that are all uploading the same binary or binaries with the same file name. That, of course, is a good indicator that these particular IP addresses are part of a particular botnet. Like one particular attack botnet that Guy was looking at here was a red tail. Of course, you could also look at what IP addresses they're pulling these binaries from and the like. So there are a bunch of relationships like this that you can look at to better understand the data. This doesn't just apply to honeypots, of course. This also applies to any other data like this, any other log data that you have, and where you're trying to sort of identify relationships. So building these graphs here, the underlying library here is called GraphViz. That's what Gephi is using in order to sort of provide this more interactive view of the data. And then we have an interesting, potentially critical vulnerability in zlib. Zlib, well, that's everybody's favorite compression library. And of course, it's part of many commercial and open source products. It comes with a utility untgz. Untgz does unpack TGZ files, and one of the obvious parameters here is the file name. The file name is then being copied into a 1 kilobyte buffer without ever actually checking what the length of that file name is. So we have a very classic, simple buffer overflow here. Exploitability, of course, is a different question. Depends on whether that untgz utility is reachable, how the file name is being supplied to the utility and such. So lots of dependencies again here, which, as I mentioned yesterday, sometimes it's difficult to sort of assign such a simple CVSS number or such to a vulnerability like this, because it really depends a lot on how this particular library is being used or this utility in order to figure out how severe this particular vulnerability is. And every year, sort of between Christmas and New Year, the Chaos Computer Club, or CCC in Germany, is running their annual conference and congress. That is often being used, in particular for the European community, to release new vulnerabilities and also have some social and policy discussions. Well, the standout talk this time around dealt with GnuPG, the PGP implementation that's very popular and very widely used, probably the standard PGP implementation at this point. And the talk did disclose 14 different vulnerabilities. Some of them allow you to alter messages and without actually destroying the signature. Others are just relatively straightforward remote code execution vulnerabilities, where if a user decrypts a file, the file then writes arbitrary files to the file systems and can that way being used for code execution. Simple things like null bytes being used as a terminator, and as a result, nothing beyond that byte being actually included in the signature. So a number of interesting vulnerabilities. Patches are on the way, but I don't think they have all been released yet. I've seen some patch notes here. I'll link in the show notes to the page that was set up here, pgp.fail, which also includes a video of the talk. Great talk, by the way, if you can stand the presenter's German accent. Well, and if you had your Cisco switches reboot last night, you were not alone. Interesting DNS issue here. Turns out that if you used Cloudflare DNS in order to do DNS resolution on your Cisco switches, and only certain models were affected, you ran into an issue where Cloudflare altered the order of CNAME and non-CNAME records in the answer. That apparently confused these Cisco switches or their DNS client implementation, which then led to a DNS error, which in turn led to a fatal error on the device and caused it to reboot, which of course then led to some downtime as the system rebooted. This should have been fixed by now by Cloudflare, but ultimately this is kind of a bug in Cisco's DNS client implementation. Not sure if there is some kind of patch upcoming. You may want to take a look at it. It's possible that other DNS providers would do similar things with like the order of these DNS records. The order is not specified. It's sort of more just customary that you first have the actual record and the CNAME, but in the meantime, either disable the DNS lookup if you aren't sure if your DNS provider plays games like this, or make sure that your DNS provider complies with the standard that Cisco expects. Well, and that's it for today and for this week, the first week of the new year. If you wonder about my teaching schedule, I'm actually taking a little bit of time off from teaching the first couple of months here, but I will be teaching again in April. First of all, in Orlando at our big conference, I'll be teaching our Defending Web Application class there. And then secondly, in Amsterdam, a couple weeks later, I'll be teaching the Intrusion Detection class, Sec 503. So if you're interested, links to the classes can be found at the bottom of the show notes. Well, and that's it for today. Thanks for listening, and talk to you again on Monday. Bye.